Hi everyone, and welcome back to this month's Research Roundup, where we talk about all things to do with optimisation, health span and longevity. This month we saw an article come out in Sports Medicine that was quite interesting. We've all probably heard of Zone 2 training, and this is often touted as being a really effective way to train, very good for cardiovascular health. Well, the authors of this article decided to challenge that theory and question whether Zone 2 training was the most effective form of training for mitochondrial health, for energy, metabolism, and of course for cardiovascular health. And what they found is that Zone 2 training actually didn't have a great effect in those areas. It was good in very unfit people in helping them to improve their fitness. But what their literature review showed was in fact that higher intensity training was more beneficial for mitochondrial function, it was more beneficial for cardiovascular health than was Zone 2 training. And so once again, this comes back to saying doing one thing alone isn't going to cover all bases. We should probably make sure when it comes to exercise, we're doing mixed routines throughout the week, using strength and resistance training, higher intensity training, Zone 2 for our endurance and our general fitness, but making sure that we're doing all sorts of training because there are different health benefits from different modes of training. And so Zone 2 alone for cardiovascular health, probably not enough evidence to support its usefulness. You probably need to be looking more at higher intensity training. The other article that came out in Atherosclerosis Journal was looking at lipoprotein a. And so for those of you who may not know, lipoprotein a is an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease. And even if everything else in your lipid profile looks good, elevation in levels of lipoprotein a increase your risk of developing cardiovascular disease. And what the authors of this paper did was they challenged the current acceptable treatment option of using common statins. And they found that in fact statins and the usual approaches to cholesterol management were largely ineffective against lipoprotein a. And in fact, they found that the PCSK9 monoclonal antibodies and the SETP inhibitors, as well as niacin, were in fact beneficial in reducing lipoprotein a, whereas your common statins, ezetimibe, your fibrates and things like that, were not effective in lowering lipoprotein a. So what this tells us, because at the moment there is no standard recognized therapy for elevated lipoprotein a, but we do have treatments that work. And so what this tells us is with people who have elevations in lipoprotein a, they need to manage diet and they need to manage exercise and they need to manage lifestyle to reduce their overall cardiovascular risk. But they should be considering targeted supplementation with things such as niacin under controlled supervision by a practitioner, because niacin itself can cause some problems, and then also consider targeted pharmacological medications that have been shown to be effective for lowering lipoprotein a, and perhaps not just going to the standard therapy if that was an option for them. And the final article that came out this month, which was interesting, was to do with the role of the gut microbiome in human health. And the authors of this study that was published in the Geroscience Journal found that there was a genetic proteomic link between gut microbiome and health span and longevity. Now, we know a lot about the gut microbiome. These days it's been associated with so many things, but actually there was very little evidence linking the gut microbiome to health span and longevity. Definitely there's a lot of evidence to disease treatment and also to disease prevention, but specifically for the area of health span and longevity, the gut microbiome didn't have a lot of evidence behind it. And so through this study, they were able to find, using proteomics, that different gut bacteria cause different effects in the body on Healthspan. And so they found, for example, streptococcus, or too much streptococcus bacteria in the gut, was actually associated with advanced aging, and that was kind of working against us. Whereas other ones that were found to be associated more with improved aging. So Akkermansia, for example, was one of the species that was found to be associated with longer health span. And so those are ones that we often find deplete in the microbiome when we test that. And so taking in the correct prebiotics, having the correct diet can help to encourage the growth of those ones. And so again, we're seeing gut microbiome really important. It's very easy these days to get your microbiome tested using much more accurate technology. So shotgun metabolomics are things that we can start to, metagenomics I should say, are things that we should be considering in doing in terms of our gut microbiome mapping. So some really interesting research. Pop over to the blog, have a look at the other articles that are there, and I look forward again to seeing you next month.